There's something deeply unsettling about a person who no longer needs constant attention, not because they hate people, not because they gave up on love, but because they finally discovered something most of the world never does: peace, real peace, the kind that appears when you stop chasing validation, stop performing, stop begging to be chosen, and finally learn how to sit alone with your own thoughts without feeling afraid. I've lived long enough to notice something strange. The strongest people I've ever met were almost never the loudest ones. They weren't trying to dominate every room. They weren't desperate to impress anybody. And they certainly weren't addicted to being seen. In fact, most of them had learned how to disappear from the noise completely. And the world doesn't know what to do with people like that, especially when it's a woman, because society has a very specific image of what a woman is supposed to be: always available, always emotionally giving, always waiting to be loved, always needing someone beside her to feel complete. So when people encounter a woman who genuinely enjoys her own solitude, they become uncomfortable, not because she's doing something wrong, but because her existence quietly challenges everything they were taught to believe. People immediately create explanations for her. She must be lonely. She probably got hurt. She's too difficult. She's cold. But almost nobody considers the possibility that maybe she simply woke up. Maybe she got tired of abandoning herself just to keep relationships alive. Maybe she spent years shrinking her personality, softening her boundaries, forgiving disrespect, pretending not to notice emotional neglect, just to avoid ending up alone. Until one day, she realized something terrifying. She already was alone, even while sitting next to somebody. And that kind of loneliness changes a person forever, because once someone experiences emotional emptiness inside a relationship, physical solitude stops feeling so frightening. Actually, it starts feeling peaceful. And that's the part most people will never understand. A quiet home is not always a sad home. Sometimes it's the first safe place a person has ever known. There's no tension there, no walking on eggshells, no emotional games, no exhausting performance, just silence. And after years of emotional chaos, silence can feel like freedom. Most people are terrified of silence. That's why they keep themselves constantly distracted. Phones, relationships, noise, drama, social media, small talk, toxic attachments, anything to avoid being alone long enough to hear what's happening inside themselves. But eventually, life exhausts you. And if you're lucky, it exhausts you enough to finally become honest. Because there comes a moment in adulthood when you stop asking, "How do I make people love me?" And you begin asking, "Why was I taught that I needed their approval in order to love myself?" That question changes everything. And the people who finally answer it become very dangerous to a world built on insecurity. I think one of the saddest truths about modern life is how many people have confused attachment with love. They don't actually feel connected, they feel dependent. And there's a difference, a massive difference. Dependency says, "Please don't leave me, because I don't know who I am without you." Love says, "I know exactly who I am, and I choose to share my life with you." Most people never reach that second stage, not because they're weak, but because nobody ever taught them how to survive emotionally on their own. From childhood, people are conditioned to believe that being alone means something is wrong with you, especially women. If a woman is single for too long, society immediately starts investigating her life, like there must be hidden damage somewhere. Meanwhile, nobody questions exhausted people staying inside miserable relationships just to avoid sleeping alone. That's considered normal. Think about that. We live in a world where people are praised for enduring emotional starvation, but judged for protecting their peace. And over time, some people begin waking up to that insanity. They start realizing how much of their life was spent performing emotional labor for people who barely noticed, always understanding, always forgiving, always giving, always adjusting, until eventually they become emotionally bankrupt and something changes inside them. Not bitterness, clarity. That's what scares people. A person with clarity becomes difficult to manipulate because manipulation depends on emotional hunger. If someone desperately needs validation, attention, romance, approval, you can control them, you can guilt them, you can breadcrumb them, you can keep them trapped inside confusion. But once somebody becomes comfortable alone, those old tactics stop working. That's why emotionally peaceful people often intimidate others without even trying. Their energy feels different, calmer, slower, harder to control. They don't chase, they don't beg, they don't over explain themselves anymore. And the strange thing is, people often call this cold, but it isn't coldness. It's self respect that no longer apologizes for existing. A healed person starts looking dangerous to people who benefited from their wounds. That applies to friendships too, family too, relationships too. Because once somebody stops tolerating emotional chaos, certain connections naturally fall apart. And yes, that part hurts. Sometimes healing feels lonely at first. Not because peace is lonely, but because chaos was familiar. A lot of people mistake emotional familiarity for compatibility. They confuse anxiety with passion, possession with love, attention with intimacy. But mature peace feels different. It doesn't create emotional addiction, it creates emotional safety. And many people have never experienced that before. That's why calm relationships sometimes feel boring to wounded people. Their nervous system became addicted to instability. So when they finally encounter peace, they don't recognize it, they mistrust it. But the people who truly heal eventually stop craving intensity. They stop romanticizing emotional suffering, and they begin protecting their inner world like something sacred. That's when solitude transforms. It no longer feels like punishment. It becomes filtration, a quiet space where fake connections can no longer survive. And honestly, that's one of the most powerful transformations a human being can experience. The moment you stop asking, who will choose me? And start asking, who deserves access to my peace? Most people spend their entire lives trying to become acceptable. Acceptable to their family, acceptable to society, acceptable to strangers, acceptable to people who were never even capable of loving them correctly. And somewhere along the way, they lose themselves completely. Not all at once, slowly, quietly, one compromise at a time. They stop saying what they really feel. They stop asking for what they truly need. They laugh when they're hurt. They tolerate disrespect to avoid conflict. They stay available to people who only remember them when convenient, until eventually they wake up one day feeling emotionally invisible. That kind of pain changes people, especially when they realize they participated in their own disappearance. And I think that's why some people become deeply protective of their solitude later in life, because solitude gave them something the world never did: room to hear themselves again. No performance, no pretending, no emotional negotiation, just truth, raw truth, the kind that arrives late at night when the world becomes quiet enough for your soul to finally speak. And what many people discover in those moments is uncomfortable. They realize they spent years chasing people when what they truly wanted was peace. They weren't starving for romance. They were starving for emotional safety. That's a completely different hunger. And once someone experiences genuine inner peace, their standards change forever, not in a superficial way, not in an arrogant way, in a deeply human way, because now they understand the emotional cost of abandoning themselves. They understand what it feels like to lose years trying to earn basic respect, and they refuse to return to that version of life again. That's why emotionally mature people often seem quieter. They no longer feel the need to prove their worth every 5 minutes. They don't argue for attention. They don't force connections. They don't panic when someone pulls away, because they finally understand something powerful. Anything forced eventually breaks. Real connection doesn't require constant performance, and honestly, that realization alone can completely transform a person's life, especially in today's world, because modern culture rewards performance more than authenticity. People are taught how to attract attention, but not how to build inner stability. They know how to create an image, but not how to create peace. That's why so many people look connected online while feeling completely empty in private. And the people who escape that trap become almost impossible to manipulate psychologically, because they are no longer desperate to escape themselves. That's real freedom, not money, not status, not popularity. Freedom is being able to sit alone in a quiet room without feeling abandoned by your own existence. Very few people ever reach that state, and the ones who do stop living from emotional desperation. They begin living from alignment. Their relationships change, their energy changes, even their presence changes. You can feel it immediately. There's a calmness around them that doesn't seek approval anymore. And ironically, that's often when they become most attractive, not because they're trying to attract anybody, but because peace has a presence, a powerful one, especially in a world addicted to emotional noise. The truth is, some people will never understand this kind of transformation because they still believe love means sacrifice without limits. They still believe exhaustion is proof of loyalty. They still believe being chosen matters more than being respected. But eventually, life teaches certain people a different lesson: that losing yourself to keep somebody else is not love. It's self abandonment. And once a person fully understands that, they never return to the old version of themselves again. Maybe that's the real reason peaceful people make others uncomfortable. They are living proof that happiness was never hiding inside constant attention. And deep down, a lot of people sense that. That's why truly independent people often get misunderstood. People project all kinds of stories onto them. They think they're better than everyone. They're emotionally unavailable. They're too guarded. But many times, those people are simply exhausted from living in survival mode for too long. They are tired of one-sided relationships, tired of emotional confusion, tired of shrinking themselves just to remain lovable. So they stop performing. And the moment they stop performing, their entire life changes. Because peace requires honesty, real honesty, not the polished version people show online. I'm talking about the terrifying kind of honesty where you finally admit, this relationship is draining me. This friendship only exists when I give more than I receive. I've spent years trying to earn love from emotionally unavailable people. That level of truth changes a human being permanently. And once someone builds a peaceful life alone, they become extremely careful about who they allow into it. Not because they hate people, but because they finally understand the value of emotional safety. That's why mature solitude doesn't feel empty, it feels protected. There's a massive difference. An empty life feels desperate, a protected life feels intentional, and intentional people move differently. They stop rushing, stop chasing, stop forcing, stop trying to rescue everybody around them because they realize something most people learn too late. You cannot save people who are committed to misunderstanding themselves. And you certainly cannot build peace by betraying your own soul. So eventually, a new standard is born inside them, a quiet standard, one that says, if love enters my life, it must bring honesty. It must bring peace. It must bring emotional consistency. Otherwise, my solitude is already beautiful enough. That's not arrogance, that's emotional maturity. And honestly, I think more people are beginning to reach that point now. The world has exhausted people emotionally, mentally, spiritually. People are tired of pretending, tired of shallow conversations, tired of relationships that look good publicly but feel empty privately. They want something real now, something calm, something safe, something honest. And sometimes before a person can experience that kind of connection with someone else, they first have to learn how to stop abandoning themselves in silence. That may be the hardest lesson adulthood teaches, because nobody warns you that self betrayal can become a habit, a quiet habit, one that slowly teaches you to tolerate loneliness inside crowded rooms, inside relationships, inside your own life, until one day you finally decide you can no longer live disconnected from yourself. And that decision changes everything, not overnight, but deeply. You begin protecting your energy differently, speaking differently, choosing differently. You stop asking, how do I keep people from leaving? And begin asking, why was I willing to leave myself just to keep them comfortable? That question can rebuild an entire life because the people who finally learn how to enjoy their own presence become free. Not perfect, not emotionless, not untouchable. Free, free from begging for validation, free from emotional performance, free from needing constant reassurance to feel valuable. And once someone reaches that level of inner peace, love stops being a rescue mission. It becomes a choice, a beautiful choice. Two whole people walking beside each other, not because they are incomplete alone, but because their peace recognizes itself in the other person. And honestly, that may be the rarest kind of love left in this world.